So as Martin mentioned, to close off the evening, I would like to present my vision for more composable styling. We'll get in a minute to what I mean by that. I have the lucky advantage that already two people sort of talked about styling, especially custom elements. Keanu did in his talk about HTML, and Gabriel did in his talk about Alembic. And this is going in a similar direction. So if you take a look at what I mean by styling, then basically, colloquially speaking, it's just how does my document look? But at a deeper level, it's about going from something semantical to something visual. We have these headings, we have figures, and so on, and we translate them to something that is like this font size, this font weight, color, spacing, etc. So what it's really about is styling is transforming this document model from a semantical document model to a more visual one. But it needn't even be like the visual paged one. It could be HTML, could be plain text, could be Pandoc AST for better integration. And what I mean by composability in this scenario is to combine rules to achieve a larger goal. So as Gabriel mentioned, a template is basically a collection of styles. And the better way we can compose individual styles, the more composability we get. So in Typst today, we have composability. For example, if you take a look at this example, then we have this heading numbering set rule, and we have the show set rule for the text. And as you can see, I get my built-in headings show rule that provides me with this look where the one.introduction, which takes into account the set rule, and I get my red text from my own rule. So the built-in rule composes with my rule. And in a similar fashion, I can have a rule that uses the built-in show rule but does some real scripting transformation, not just setting something, but for example, putting a rectangle around it. I can have a rule that only applies in certain scenarios, a rule, for example, that only applies to level 1 headings and not arbitrary headings. And I can also have multiple show set rules in my text that also compose a rule for general headings and then a rule for level 2 headings, for example. This is all nice and fine, but in my opinion, it's not composable enough because templates are just exceedingly hard to tweak. If you go to Typst Universe and take basically any template, then it's very hard to change something about it. If it's exactly what you need, for example, your university thesis template, that's fine. But these more general templates, like some sort of letter, but maybe with my own font or something. Even my own font can be pretty hard if the template already sets the font. And the reason why that happens is because the rules are too large. Basically, I have a template with a function, and that function is one big blob. I can't really modify it. And let's look at an example where it's not even a template, it's just some heading in our standard library. What if I want to change the gap between the number and the body? So I think I closed 5 or 6 issues and a couple of PRs that just added like numbering gap or something, because I think it's not a solution that scales to Typst as a whole. It's too limited. But just this gap, creating this gap is really hard today. And I think that shouldn't be the case. So basically what I'm getting to is we need smaller building blocks. Just a heading replacing how a heading looks is not fine-grained enough. We need something like this numbering thing, or like there are smaller building blocks there. And this is not a new insight. We have seen this in the last Typst meetup with the talk about Lilac, where we have like ticks and we have like, yeah, I think this is called the tick on the bar. Now what's the axis? Whatever. So we need to decompose our document into smaller building blocks. And even heading is maybe not small enough. And we've done that in Typst in the past because it was just bad enough. Like heading numbering isn't yet that bad, but figure caption was bad enough. So we added a figure caption element that you can style. But the thing is, the implementation is really bad. So it has these 4 fields, kind, supplement, numbering, and counter, which are just duplicated from the figure element. It has an internal field called figure location, which you're not supposed to know about, but which is needed to make it work. And if we applied that like genius design to heading.numbers, let's imagine an element for studying the heading numbers. Do we add a supplement and numbering field and a heading location field just so that this number element can somehow show itself correctly? do we add a heading.separator fields that would actually luckily need no fields because it's sort of just a gap in the configuration there. I mean, we could do that, and it would enable some nice use cases. For example, we have this rule that works today for configuring an outline entry. And with heading.numbers, we could do something like setting text red on the heading numbers. And we could change the separator. That would already be an improvement. But basically, at what cost? And what do we do if we want to recompose the heading from its parts? Let's say we want the number at the back, the text on the front, no separator. Like, there are smaller parts, and these rules I just showed work fine to basically apply fine-grained styling to an individual part. But does it allow me to recompose the heading from its parts? The answer is, well, I guess. I can create this heading.numbers field maybe with these 3 fields it needs. Nobody wants to write that though, so I guess we can just synthesize it on the heading like we do for a caption today. But there's a bunch of code in the compiler that basically is just because we are missing a more general abstraction, I think. We could have a method like we do for outline.entry.indented, so we already had 3 patterns that exist in the compiler. And I think none of this really works. And if we think back to what I started with, then I think all of these things are missing something. And the missing something is that styling is transformation, and transformation happens on elements. So a method is not the right tool, and a field is not the right tool. An element is the right tool. We just don't have a good way to create and recompose these elements. So let's take a look at this example again and try to change it up. So first of all, we can take some inspiration from the separator element. Let's just get rid of these fields and try to think of a different way. Because the numbers element exists in the context of some heading. So why don't we write something like this? Okay, we have a heading, and now we're showing the numbers, and because we have this it element, the heading itself, in scope here, we can already define how the numbers look from the context without them having these ugly fields on them. And now, like, this is not great, obviously, but let's say we are introducing a nice ancestry selector, and we can say, okay, we have a heading, we name it so that we can refer to it, and within there are numbers. And this heading.numbers element has no fields at this point. It's just basically specifying the part. And if you think about it, numbers are not specific to headings, and the separator isn't specific to headings either. It's just some sort of component in a heading. It's a sort of fragment. So why not just make it more general? Let's make it a fragment. Many things can have a separator. And if we apply that here, we can see, okay, we have a heading. It's a block containing numbers, a separator, and a body. And we also define how the numbers should look in a heading. And now, I think if we look at it this way, there are more patterns that are emerging here. So the body is just some generic, like the main content, so to speak. And if we just call that a slot, then suddenly we can move the body down here in the slot, have the slot at the top, and suddenly we can refer to the slot. And we can use it in rules to say, oh, add something different into the slot, or add something more into the slot. And then finally, the last rule is, like the top rule is still a bit big for my liking. It does 2 things. It says, I want to compose the numbers, the separator, and the slot, but it also always adds this block. So what's really happening here is the numbers, the separator, and the slot are sort of the inner thing of the heading, and the inner thing happens to be in a block. And the nice result of that is that these fragments are just some glue that we basically put between our rules for the rules to have some common vocabulary. And we can use these in our own rules. So if you want your headings inline, just get rid of the block by just using the inner fragment. If you want to have your headings reversed, ignore the whole block thing, it will remain in place, but really find the inner part. And basically, it's just structuring the thing into smaller parts. And obviously, at this point, it's very relevant for the user of Typst to know what these inner parts are. And that's why I'm saying it's basically already the case today in Typst that how your show rule is implemented is really part of the, in programming terms, the public interface of it. If you change your show rule, you're sort of breaking the user styling potentially. And there isn't really a way around this, but I think we should embrace it specifically for the structure that we want to expose, and this is basically the fragment structure of the element. And I want to take a look at another example that came up recently in the GitHub Meetup issues for a page header and page footer element, and I think we even have the person here who opened a second issue on that topic. And so the idea in this case was to have a page.header element with a single field, and that field is populated automatically by the compiler from the set page header rule. And then you can have an existing header, but also define additional things like on it, like set text or something, or more content. And let's take a look at how this would look with this alternative approach of fragments. So really, okay, let's do this first. So there's one more issue with this that also exists with the figure caption. We already have a naming collision now where page.header constructs the element and context page.header tries to retrieve the field on the page element. So there's a sort of naming collision, which is sort of unfortunate. And now let's take a look at how this can both go away. Basically, we have a page containing a header fragment. We don't need the set page rule at all. It's just needless cruft. The compiler will automatically insert this header fragment. We can define how it looks. We can add more stuff to it composably. And overall, we dropped like all the boilerplate and really just composing our rules, because in the end, show rules are always more flexible than some settable property. It doesn't mean we should get rid of settable properties because they have their place and they're useful. But I think the composing part of the show rule is by a lot of promised lies that we haven't yet really unlocked. And the nice thing is realizing all of this, even if not exactly with this syntax or whatever, but the ideas behind this doesn't need much. Like this could basically exist in types today, assuming that this fragment module with some built-in fragments would be built in. We don't need custom elements, but if we had them, then you could also have your own fragments, if that makes sense for you. The only thing that really is missing in the compiler is ancestry selectors, because you can use nested show rules, but they're not quite what I would want here. We don't want to select all the inner slots or something within a heading, only the next one, basically. And obviously, we also need to have this binding mechanism I showed, this heading as it, to make this convenient. I don't think it would be convenient with nested show rules, but this is basically the only blocker, and it's honestly not that difficult to implement this. So the thing I want to end with is, all of this is just thoughts I had. This is thoughts I developed during a vacation in like last September, and since then I basically didn't touch it. I wanted to write a blog post, didn't get to it. Now I have the talk opportunity here. My open question to the people interested in is, do you think this approach can scale up to full templates? And do you think like this main idea of having these fieldless fragments that are shown within some context, does that hold up to like full templates? Is it a good idea, or is it just me making shit up?
Hi. So I think this is very interesting, and it seems to solve composability. But I'm interested to know
about a little bit closer.
Yeah, the fragments module. This seems like, for instance, the fragment.header. This is like the header is very related to pages, and so there's a risk of, I guess, name collisions, and also. Like I feel like it would be like if I'm making a template, maybe I need a header for something. Like, should I just reuse this thing because it's called the same way?
Exactly. It's like it's an element without fields. It has whatever meaning you give to it, and that's why, like I specifically used this example of the page header. You could have other headers, but the element does not more than you saying it's a header. You could, if you think that's not semantically appropriate for use case, you could of course define your own fragment once there are custom types. But I think it's a benefit to have, like, I'm not like attached to this whole fragment dot module. Like this module could also be a global thing or some other thing. But I think reusing the same building blocks and people building an intuition for what kind of building block is used in a particular scenario is valuable.
If I understood the problem you mentioned with page headers correctly, was that you already have an existing header and want to add to it. How would I add content to the header? Like take the existing, with your approach, take the existing header content and add, I don't know, a second line.
So basically you would just do show page fragment.header, it plus line break and your content.
So the it would be after the colon with fragment.header as it.
You could either do as it, or you could define a closure because it's like the innermost thing in the ancestry. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure on when you, like, there should be some, if we have this as it might change up the like canonical style to write a show rule from using a function to using as it. And I think this as it has a few nice properties. For example, with as it, you could even have set rules that depend on the it. Like the set rules would be evaluated with the information of the it, whereas today they need to be evaluated basically where the rule is defined. But yeah, in principle, you could still use the function from I guess, not settled on that.
Yeah, I hope that's not too type shady, but one thing that I thought was the inner fragment that you mentioned. With the others, I see that they really have a semantic meaning, like, okay, there are separators, there are numbers, there are contents that fit in a slot, but the inner feels like, okay, that doesn't really have a meaning and it's very arbitrary. Do you think is that a problem or is that just okay?
I mean, I think that's something that's very like worthwhile to discuss. I think my definition of semantic might be a bit broader than yours. Like, semantic doesn't have to mean that it's something that you find in Markdown or something. Semantic just means that it's a useful thing to separate. And the idea of inner would just be whenever you have some rule that applies a container that you might not want, and the container contains something like, in this case, a block, you could use this inner thing. But yeah, it's just exploratory.
And the second thing was, do you think that concepts here are already testable with Alembic?
I brought that up during our on-site. Nobody had time to really test it. The ancestry mechanism in Alembic, as far as I know, does not have a way to, at least not immediately natively, to capture the it of the higher level. I think like there is definitely ways to experiment with this in current Typst. I can't say I have a ton.
So I think an interesting thought as well. I mean, well, there are very many interesting thoughts, but I think one in particular could think that at some point you also kind of have to distinguish fragments from elements themselves, right? Because I was thinking that one use case that at least I had when thinking about like Alembic, custom elements, custom types, is, for example, when you separate different parts of a template, right? So allow the template user to customize one specific part of it, which kind of is what you mentioned here, like how hard it is to modify a template. So I was thinking, like, could it make sense to, for you, does it make sense to have, like, for example, a fragment of like a title page, or is that more of an element? Like, where does it kind of separate from each other, you know?
It's a good question. So I think basically the core thing about fragments as I am envisioning them is that you do not construct them, because you you don't construct them with content. So whenever you have a user like construct the element, it definitely does not make sense. Now, if you have something like a title page, if the title page is created in the user code, then obviously it can't be a fragment. If it's in the template, then I think you could argue that it can be part of the fragment structure. I'm afraid I don't have a definitive answer, because that's why I have this open question slide, because I can't say I got too much into the template part. I mostly stayed on the heading. But yeah, I think both, it's really just something you need to explore. I don't know, just some thoughts. Okay, I think that's it.
Thank you.
Pizza.